Welcome back to the channel. I'm honored to be joined by Elizabeth Oldfield. Welcome to the channel.
Lovely to be here.
So I just read Elizabeth's book, Fully Alive, and I greatly enjoyed it. I just told her offline I'm already lending it out to, well, right now my brother and his fiance. I think it's an excellent book for people who long for more, who long to, I don't know if it's that they long for something religious, because perhaps that word might be difficult for them to use, but they long for something akin to self-transcendence, I feel. And I think you argue very well for um, why we have that need and what could possibly fill that need. And so I would like to start with you. Um, where you come from, how you grew up, perhaps, whatever you're willing to share, I'd love to hear.
Thank you. Well, it is not high drama. I grew up in a little village and sort of about an hour outside London. Um, and it was very safe and nice and small. And uh, I was racing through novels and feeling frustrated that life was so safe and nice and small. I now realize, what a gift and a privilege that is to have a
Mm,
happy and safe childhood. Um, Very loving parents who are still around, still together. Amazing, amazing gift of love I received from them. Again, not a given, not something to be taken lightly. But yes, it was. I had a friend come visit once, and he said, "Oh, you grew up in Privet Drive," and that gives you a bit of a sense of the. It wasn't quite suburban, but the sense of suburban, reasonably homogeneity, um, uh, not a high challenge. And I
mm.
yearned to be Scottish or Irish or Welsh or, to have some sort of stronger sense of identity, something a bit wilder. But there was
Yeah,
none of that around growing up, so I had to
no, I
find it in
feel that.
books.
No, people ask me where you come from. Like, yeah, sorry, it's just the Netherlands. That's
Yeah.
it. Sorry. I wish it was more spectacular. But yeah, I feel you.
Or as I get older, I come to believe that every life is fascinating, and every with enough attention, things that seem small can actually turn out to be uh, radically beautiful. And the sort of the norm core can often hide the things we're all yearning for.
Mm,
Um, I think about Thoreau going to the woods, to have this great adventure.
yeah.
And I think it's entirely possible to live lives in places that don't seem very exciting and aren't glamorous or wild or very public, and have them be extraordinarily meaningful and rich and valuable and worthy of honor and dignity. Um, but as a teenager, I was just bored out of my brain.
No, I'm in the exact same boat actually. I'm at my parents' house right now. I'm gonna be married here, and I think it's the most magical place on earth. And as a kid, I was like, I want to get out. I want to get out somewhere,
Yeah.
anywhere. Send me to a city. I want to see shops. I want to see
Yeah.
this and that. And now I've made the inversion. So
Yeah. We
it's
all
odd
walk
how that
similar
happens.
roads.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's a bit how you grew up and where you
Mm,
grew up.
yeah.
What were you like as a child? Were you generally happy, you think? Were you open?
Not sure I've ever been asked that. Um, yes, I think I was generally happy.
Mm,
I think my mum had been, um, she came from a much more precarious background, um, and had to do quite a lot of work, I think, re-parenting herself and navigating some hard things from her childhood that had really formed her. And she was a radical midwife, which in the UK there was an era where there was a kind of feminist midwifery movement, which was
mm,
really trying to put women back in the center of birthing. And um, she was this she is this extraordinarily larger than life, courageous woman. And having not received the parenting she would have wished to have had herself, she set out to break that generational cycle and to teach
mm,
herself from almost no educational attainment. She left school very young. Um, to teach herself sort of basic child development and psychology. And now all the things that are very mainstream in kind of gentle parenting and attachment theory and creating space for children's emotions, which were very much not the norm in the 80s, she was doing. And she was sitting with us and helping us work through our hard feelings and doing rupture and repair and telling us that, just giving us this deep confidence that there was love in the world and that it wasn't quite you can do anything, because that's a bit sort of, talent show kid. But it was, both my brother and I received this message that we were sort of fundamentally capable and could go
Mm,
out in the world and make our way.
that's good.
And I'm just extraordinarily grateful for that.
Mm. So you have one brother?
Yeah.
Is he older or younger?
He's younger, but he's more like an older brother.
Okay.
I'm the slightly chaotic one.
You are chaotic or he is?
I'm the slightly more chaotic one. He's more alpha. He's very
Ah, okay.
organized and tidy, and I'm none
Yeah,
of
so he's
those
got the
things.
responsibility and it can help you.
Yeah,
I see. But it's good
yeah.
to be chaotic. I encourage that just a little bit. I mean, if
It's
your
a
life is
balance.
generally okay and things are not burning around you, then I think
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
yeah,
It's fun at least.
yeah.
Okay, so that's when you were young. I think a lot of your stories in your book, which I think you wrote down really beautifully, especially some of your um, well, the conversion, I think, was really touching, and then coming back again later,
Mm,
I thought was beautiful too. And now, because I think it may be a little bit of time since you wrote that book, and now has your general outlook on the world changed much since then? Because it's a short time, but I remember you writing something about that. Like maybe I'll
mm.
think about things differently in a bit.
Yeah. Well, I think writing the book and trying to be really honest about doubt and faith and the way these things ebb and flow. I think what I felt was I don't want to write a book and then be having to talk about it in public
Mm,
and not mean it.
yes.
I Honesty is a very, very central value of mine. And finding ways to talk honestly about these transcendent things, these deep things, these tender yearnings of our heart, which, particularly if you come from my tradition, people often are nervous about speaking about them. It's not that people speak about them dishonestly, but they
Mm,
speak about them very carefully because they're worried about saying the wrong thing. They're
yes.
worried about leading anyone else astray.
Mm,
So it has always felt like not as full of life as I want it to be, the way people talk about these things in public. And so I wanted to talk about it honestly, which meant I needed to leave open space that for my, like, you know, not really believing in God, trying to shake God off, back in sort of a more comfortable relationship with my faith journey, that I'm only 40 and it might have a few more kinks in the road.
yeah.
I'm glad to say I'm not in a big crisis of doubt or feeling very destabilized. I think I feel very encouraged actually about the reaction that people have had and the number of people who want to talk about these yearnings. And
Mm,
um, I just feel very blessed to have
that's
been
good.
led. So yeah, I'm in a good place. I feel like I wrote myself into some clarity on some things, and that clarity is holding for now.
Yes. And I think it's pulling for a lot of people. I think it's deeply important to have people be honest, and I think authentic is the word, because that's I think what a lot of people have lacked for a while now,
Mm,
in public discourse especially, to
yeah,
have people that are authentic and to speak honestly about a lot of topics that are either taboo or either too difficult to talk about.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, that's something that definitely shows in the book, and I think it's a great strength of it. Um, and to add to that, I think we are in a moment of crisis in many ways.
mm,
A lot of people have outlined that. I really like John Vervaeke's conception of it.
yeah,
The way, well, he speaks about the meaning crisis. He also speaks about the meta crisis. How all of these things are coming together now. And I think your
yeah,
voice is so important because there's a lot of thinky talky intellectual men who have a lot of interesting ideas, but then after a
yeah.
while you're like, yeah, okay, but that has to go hand in hand with some of the feminine spirit, and I feel that is really necessary,
Mm.
and you're bringing both in many ways.
Thanks. Yeah, well,
So,
I think we need each other, right? We need both of our brain hemispheres. We need our heart and our mind. There's all this language that we use, which is all metaphorical for the different ways that we are and the different ways we learn and the different ways we know.
Hmm.
But it certainly felt like one part of my vocation was to try and carve open a bit of space for a different sensibility,
Yeah.
a way of saying, yes, we can spend a long time analyzing exactly the drivers of these crises, and that is not dishonorable work. I want
Mm.
that work to be done. But if that's all that we do and all that we value, then we don't actually move forward. And
Yes.
the question that I felt most, animated by was, okay, so who do we need to be becoming to meet this moment? What are the virtues that we need to be growing into, that I need to be growing into, frankly, because I don't feel equipped. I don't feel brave enough or kind enough or steady enough to be the kind of woman that I think the world needs, the kind of mother that my kids need, the kind of neighbor that my neighbors need, the kind of person I want to become for my
Mm.
own sense of,
Mm.
what I want people to say about me when I die.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, that both wanting to be in conversation, John Vervaeke is just seems such a lovely guy, and there's a lot of people in that space that I love and respect. And to get to be in conversation and hopefully just seasoning with a slightly different sensibility
Yeah.
is a great thing to
Yeah.
get to be doing.
No, absolutely. And the first talk I listened to from yours was with John,
Mm.
and this was in preparation for me talking to him. And I was gonna ask him about his life and everything, but then I listened to yours, and I was like, well, there's no way to do it better than that. And
Oh,
it's to date, it's my favorite John Vervaeke conversation. I think you really got the best out of him. It was really, really touching. And what you're saying ties me into my next question, which was about the future.
mm.
Um, a lot of us are worried about the future, a lot of us for different reasons.
Yeah,
I think for you and for myself as well, it's a funny position to be in because I think you and I both know a lot of people that are on different ends of the either political spectrum or the personal spectrum.
yeah,
So they think the world is ending for a lot of different reasons. But
yeah. The bad guy is different
yes,
depending on where you sit.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I was wondering how you feel about the future yourself, if it's something you have optimism towards, and what you think is a wise
Mm.
stance to take toward the future.
Mm. It was one of the big drivers of the book was the sense of the future disappearing, like not being able to. We were looking at schools for one of my children, and I had this like, I don't know if the world is going to be anything like it is now by the
Mm.
time she finishes that school, right? I could not imagine it. Everyone was talking as if everything was going to carry on exactly as it's always been. And part of my brain was just like short circuiting. It's like, I don't think this is stable, this situation that
Mm.
we are in. And I was reading Henri Nouwen, who's a beautiful theologian, and he was writing in the early 90s about nuclear man. And he wrote about how when you were living with the high threat of nuclear obliteration, the future disappears, and the way it can leave you with this very kind of disassociative, narcissistic, deracinated feeling of not knowing how to be in the world and not knowing what to do and not knowing where to put your energy. And I had this real like, I don't want to be nuclear, and I
Yeah.
see it in the climate movement, not knowing how to imagine the future, not knowing, frankly, what horrors might be ahead of us, which is part of the story that is told. And again, I can't, I'm not a climate scientist. I don't have, most of us, the honest answer, we have no idea. We have no idea what the future holds. There are
Yeah.
forces at work about which we barely know exist and have no control over. Um, so that feeling like desperately needing some steadiness of soul was one of the senses of which actually in my tradition, I call myself a Christian, and in this tradition, the idea of the end of the world is very central. The idea that there will be some kind of reckoning, there will be some kind of, well, it's making me teary. That's interesting. There will be some kind of restoration,
Mm.
right? And that it was never going to just trot on merrily.
Yes.
And that the early Christians thought it was happening really soon,
Mm.
right? Jesus is coming back really soon. be prepared. And so learning to live in the tension of the future is completely unpredictable and we have no idea what's going to happen next
Yes.
is an inheritance of my tradition. To thank God for your daily bread, right? Do not worry about tomorrow.
Mm.
Do the good you can do today. Make amends with the people that need to forgive you before you come to the Lord's table, because you do not know, like, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Live today and trust that whatever happens in the future, there will be enough love. There will be enough love.
Yeah.
And that the end of the story is that God will wipe every tear from every eye.
Mm.
But that what happens in between might be extremely hairy.
Yeah.
And that, like, to sort of, it's quite confronting as a tradition. But bizarrely, sort of trying to live myself into it imaginatively felt like, okay, there's some resources. I can put my roots down deep into this, and I can try and listen to these 2,000 years of song from my tradition,
Mm.
and that there might be medicine there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people worry that tradition is not ready to face up to challenges of today, but like you illustrate perfectly with your example, it was already happening then in many ways,
Yeah,
and it's kind of always happening.
yeah,
And
yeah. And
all,
the challenges might change,
yeah,
but in the third century, when the plague wiped out most people in Europe,
mm,
felt like the end of the world, and some Christians, not all of them, I doubt if I would have been one of them, like, responded to that not by fleeing but staying and looking after other people's sick, right?
yeah,
The the end of the world for the Jews in the pogroms, the end of the world during the Holocaust, the end of the world for indigenous people under colonialism has come again and again and again and again. And there's so little we can control, but we can control a bit our own formation and the state of our own souls, and the way we respond to those kind of
yes,
moments. Do we want to panic and hoard and retreat into our tribes and blame everyone else? Or do we want to say, okay, in this little patch of land, in this little scrap of time, can I bring a bit more love and justice and care and patience into the world?
yeah, yeah, responsibility, and I think that that's where meaning comes in as well.
Mm.
So the world is always ending. Would you say that faith then is a central thing to have?
It is for me.
Yes.
I feel like we all have faith in something. It might be conscious
Mm,
or unconscious, and it is often ourselves, um, or systems, governments, our parents, our friends, technology, wealth. Faith is just trust, right? And it is easy when we have a lot of agency, a lot of intelligence, a lot of wealth to trust that those things will save us. And one, I don't think they will, and two, I actually think they eat us alive if we put we put too much
yeah,
of our trust in them.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, faith in something bigger than ourselves that is not finite power over others, which is essentially what money is. Um,
wait, can you repeat what money is? Finite power over someone else or something else?
yeah, power over others.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be power over others, but essentially it gives money is agency, money is choice.
I see. Yes. Okay.
Um, Money means we don't have to ask other people to help us. We can pay them to help us.
Mm,
And so more and more I fear wealth whilst also obviously craving it, because it disconnects us, because it makes that it stops us needing each other. You know, rich people
yeah.
don't have to pay someone to help them move. They but don't have to ask someone to help them move. They pay someone.
Yes.
I ask for help less when I am richer, but in not receiving help, I'm not therefore weaving the bonds of reciprocity and investing in community. I'm not allowing myself to be helped. I'm not stepping up to help others as much. Or if I do, it's from a place of power and agency, and that disassociates us. So yeah, trusting money to save us feels dangerous on many levels. And for
Yes.
me, the most important one is always going to be relationally.
Mm, I agree. And you pointed out in your book as well um, how many times the Bible speaks of money in this way, in
Yeah.
a warning way.
Yeah.
Mm.
more than anything else, I think, is very confronting.
Yeah, it is confronting. It's difficult because, like, in
Yeah.
theory, you're like, yes, of course, I should give it all away, and then good luck doing that.
Yeah.
You find community important, is what I'm hearing as well.
Hmm.
Um, in the book, you outlined that you started living with different housemates as well,
Hmm.
alongside your family.
Yeah.
How was that experience, and what has motivated you to do that?
Yeah. I think many motivations, some of them were really practical. We're part of a church in London. We wanted to stay part of it. We felt like actually quite cool to root in the city and be people who were around and of use over generations rather than just coming in, stripping the property values and then leaving.
Mm,
Um, there is a loneliness crisis and a housing crisis and a climate crisis. There's just all kinds of ways in which living in these little individual units doesn't make any kinds of sense. There's a care crisis, a capacity crisis. No one's
mm,
really happy as far as I can tell with the way we're living.
yeah,
Um, and then for us, there was a strong faith motivation. It's over the centuries, Christians have often come together and lived in more communal ways. You see it in the book of Acts, which is this kind of biography of the early church after Jesus has died and been resurrected and then ascended. You get this like, okay, wow, what next amongst his followers? And then they come together and begin to multiply. And the way they're multiplying is because they are living radically countercultural lives where they are sharing their possessions. It's sort of Marx partly based communism on it. It's
mm,
the there was no poor among them because they shared everything that they had.
yeah,
Um, and I just felt like if I'm going to be a Christian, I would like to not have it just be a little sort of social habit around the edges of my life.
yeah,
I either want to see if it's as transformative as some of the great stories claim,
mm,
or I don't. I don't want to be half in and half out.
yeah,
And it felt like living in community would be a pathway. In my tradition, we talk about being discipled, which is essentially becoming more a disciple of Jesus, becoming more someone who wants to follow Jesus. And it's really hard. And I thought I would have a better chance at it if I was witnessed close up by other people.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's also good to have that as sort of a accountability mechanism,
Mm.
and not just your family, but other people. And I think it's a very brave thing to do. And I think
Mm.
it's one of those things that people look at and is like, well, it's something that I could see myself do, but they won't ever actually
Yeah.
get there unless it's a necessity.
Yeah.
What would you say to those people that kind of feel like they would want it,
Yeah.
but they're thinking it's too unrealistic? I think that's often the
Yeah.
word. It's like it's unrealistic.
Yeah, well, it's a problem we're trying to work on. How do we change the imaginative possibilities around this stuff?
Mm,
And we've got a small group of people that we're taking through. We call them the community curious cohort, and we're taking them through looking at like how do you find your people and the financial and legal structures, and how do you deal with conflict, and what is the kind of collective rituals and practices that you need? Because actually, there's a lot of wisdom about this. It's just sort of all hidden away in all these individual traditions and stories, and it's quite hard to access what people have learned about doing this well. And we want to make that easier. But
mm,
one of the key things is, well, not to sound too bleak about it, but my guess is given where we're headed with sort of geopolitics, climate, economics, more people are going to be forced into it. And so
mm,
rather than getting forced into it and doing it badly, learning to do it now by choice with people that we have chosen and that we are laying really strong foundations with feels like good work, good work to be doing. Um, but you need to be intentional. In the
yeah,
UK, I think there are places in Europe where it's much more common and mainstream. Um, but in the UK, it's really unusual. So you just have to really be quite stubborn and intentional and persevere with hacking your way through all the different systems that are set up to essentially prevent it, as far as I can tell.
yeah. That's good. That's good advice. I want to speak a bit about your podcast, which has turned into my one of my favorites for sure in a very short time because I used to listen like to podcasts all day, every
Mm-hmm.
day, and I think my left hemisphere has just been overworked.
Yeah.
And I mean, still conversations can be very left hemispheric, especially when they're intellectual.
Yeah.
But um, I felt a sense of home listening to yours, a sense of warmth, and that really that's really something I needed. And
Thank
so,
you.
yeah, absolutely. It's what it is. I really feel that way. And so your podcast is called The Sacred. You often ask people what is sacred to you. Has someone
Mm.
ever asked you that question?
A few people, and my answer will be obvious to you because you've read the book, which is relationship.
Hmm.
And I think I probably came to that intuitively and temperamentally, but it's obviously kind of theologically pretty grounded in the Trinity and the sense that my conception of the divine is a God that is relational before anything else. Like in the heart of God is love and a sort of ongoing dance and an ongoing conversation before humans are even in the equation. Um, and in when someone asked Jesus how to sum up the law, he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love
Hmm.
your neighbor as yourself."
Hmm.
Um, I was very influenced by Martin Buber, and I think very, I'm sure it's partly confirmation bias because you always see the evidence that you want to see. But as far
Yeah.
as I can tell, our growing understanding of just how hypersocial we are as beings, how influenced we are by our peers, how this idea that we're sort of individuals making rational decisions for ourselves is just nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, healthy relationships. That's what's sacred to me.
That's really good. I've thought about it for myself for so long, and I think I don't use the same words, but I always start with saying human connection. That's definitely
Mm,
where I see it and I feel it with my bones. And then
yeah,
of course for me the religious comes in as well.
yeah,
But a overarching word would be relationship. Um,
yeah. John
but it was
Vervaeke uses this word religio for what I think is the same. He's grasping
yeah,
towards the same thing.
yeah, it's lovely how he takes in the Greek terms always.
Yeah, you need a little dictionary to listen to what he's saying.
Yeah. No, you learn the lingo and then you get into it and then you're into this weird space where you want to use this for Fakey language, but people will think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Um, but it's lovely.
It's like a code. You could just go around the world looking for the others. Who
Yeah,
else knows what
yeah,
I'm talking about?
yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, we have these groups, these talking groups. They're called estuary
Yeah.
groups that Paul van der Klei has popularized as well.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's always a couple of people that don't listen to John Vervaeke. And then
Right.
people will be speaking about the propositional and this and that. It's like, what are you guys talking about? It's like, yeah, there's this guy, he's a cognitive scientist, and it's like it's an obvious thing, you know.
Yeah.
So that's been it's been really joyful to go through that. Your podcast, is this something that you think you will continue to do for a long time? Is it something that you could keep getting a lot out
Mm.
of?
Yeah, I keep expecting to get bored and don't. Up until this podcast, the idea of doing something for this amount of time that is essentially the same thing, we've iterated,
Yeah.
would have sounded unlikely that I would have that attention span. But it's because it's different every time, because it's a different person every time, and people are so extraordinarily interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, I will keep doing. So this is going to sound super pious, but all the big decisions in my life, I try to make based on where am I being led, and
Mhm.
my guess is that I will stop doing it when I am led into something else or told to stop.
Yes. I
Otherwise, it's the
was
best job in the world. Why wouldn't I keep going?
Yeah, I love it too. I was talking to my soon-to-be father-in-law, and he was asking me, "What would you do if money wasn't a factor?"
Yeah,
And then I asked him the same, and we both said the same thing. It's like we would want to have something like this,
yeah,
to speak to whoever we would want, to
yeah.
about whatever we would want. Because you're right, people are so darn interesting. Like it is endless, isn't it?
Hmm.
How have you cultivated a ability to listen? Because I think that's not easy. Have you always had that, or is this something you train intentionally?
Interesting. I think, I think, yeah, because I also talk a lot. It's not that I'm just someone who's naturally quiet. Um, I think it comes out of a pastoral leaning or gifting. And for people outside religious context, that's a sort of fancy word for looking after people's emotional and spiritual health. And
Mhm.
so being involved in churches in my late teens and early 20s and often ended up leading these small groups, Bible studies or whatever, you end up in this kind of pseudo ministerial role. And a big part of good ministry is just listening, is hearing what
Mm.
people are actually doing, being someone who is safe and trusted. It's not going to gossip, it's not going to try and steer you, but it's going to usually just listen and then pray with you. So probably just, you know, accidentally in some ways. And then over time, I got, got a bit of formal training, bit of pastoral training, sort of basic level counseling training, some chaplaincy in there, just realizing how much life it gave me and how much of a blessing it was to people, sort of disproportionate to how simple it is and how easy it is to do for someone. That there's this phrase I always come back to by a guy called Augsburger, although I have not chased down this reference, so I might be reproducing misinformation on the internet. That I often come back to, which is listening for most people is as close to love as to be indistinguishable. And I just could see it. I could see that most of the time what someone needed was for me to sit and listen to them and help them feel seen. It didn't cost me very much. And because I was trying to live a life in which I was learning to love my neighbor, honestly, I was like, well, this is one of the easiest, most pleasant ways.
Yes, yes,
I,
absolutely.
I could do that.
Yeah, it
So
gives
yeah,
you energy,
bit of
yeah.
laziness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when I started the podcast, and also I was a journalist for years, right? I'm
Mm.
interested,
Yes.
nosy.
Yes, yes. You want to find something out about
Yeah,
the person.
yeah.
No, I feel that for sure. I want to speak a bit more about your book. I found your structure to be very interesting. You centered it around the seven deadly sins,
Mm-hmm.
which is funny because I was in a church today, and basically the church is also designed with the seven deadly sins. They're on the ceiling, and then they
Mm.
go out into these pillars, and then
Is it very
there's
old?
yeah, like 1,000 years old.
Yeah, you would not get that
No?
any almost any younger than that. That was the real heyday, where it was
Ah,
so in the moral and theological imagination.
I
I would
see.
like. Can you send me pictures? Can you go back? I'd love to see that church.
Yes, yes, absolutely. No, that's cool. So, and there was a monkey with a chalice, and me and my dad were trying to figure out
Wow.
uh, what they were representing. But it is it's a very interesting way to structure your book, and I think very effective. It reminded me a bit of personality tests and
Hmm.
different types of
Yeah.
those, you know.
Yeah, the Enneagram is quite mapped onto the seven deadly sins in a way that
Is
some people
it?
find annoying and some people find helpful.
Oh, really? I didn't know. It makes a lot
Yeah,
of sense.
yeah.
So yeah, what made you do that, and are you happy that you did?
I'm really happy now. The honest answer is very pragmatic, which is I had some themes I wanted to talk about. I went to my agent and she said, you need a structuring device. And I played with various different things. And then I realized that one of the essays I wanted to write was about sin. And once I had sort of gone, oh, actually, the thing about attention is really related to acedia, and I really want to make a defense of the Christian sexual ethic, that fits there. The polarization stuff is massive in my life, and that fit into Roth. It was fairly obvious, and it felt like enough. So I spoke to an American the other day who was like, this is a really weird thing to be trying to talk to people outside the church about, because the book is mainly aimed at people who would not call themselves Christian or are not religious or are, nervous of the church and Christianity for some
Mm,
good reasons. And I was like, you know what? In the UK, it's almost not a churchy concept anymore. It's a sort of meme. Like, I
yes,
don't know
it
why.
kind of
There's been
is.
like
Yes.
horror films about the seven deadly sins.
Yeah.
It's just like a sort of Halloweeny meme. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore was something that had some salience and that people could get their head around what I was banging on about, but was not kind of off-puttingly pious in the way that if I'd structured it around the Nicene Creed or something else would have been.
Yeah. I really liked it myself. I think people really struggle with the word sin.
Yeah.
Uh, when I speak to my fiance, who's herself not a Christian, um, when I say sin, it's already like you curl up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought it was an interesting choice, but I think you defended well at the start already.
Yeah.
Speak of why sin is still a good word to use. Could you articulate that? Why you think that is that sin?
Mm.
We should still use the word because I think it has a lot of negative associations for sure.
Yeah, and I think I quote Francis Spufford's amazing book, Unapologetic, and his, human propensity to F things up
Hmm.
is really a helpful shorthand if people really can't get on board with the word sin.
Yeah.
Actually, the human tendency to break things, to not be the kind of people we want to be, I find psychologically just very realistic. And it's real, it's all of these kind of self-improvement, wisdom, personal growth things, lots of which have great riches in them. The underlying methodology seems to me, if you have enough information and you set up your day well enough and you do enough meditation or whatever it is, take enough psychedelics or get enough therapy, and all of these things are good things, or can be good things. You'll grow up yourself. You'll become the kind of person that you want to be. And all that's getting in the way really is the information and the structures.
Mm.
And that's not true in my life. I'm not going to have all the information in the world and still make terrible choices. And the the deep reality that there's something that gets in the way, and that we seem to be sort of multi-part people, right? And the Freudians will talk about the superego and the id and the ego, and lots of wisdom traditions have had this sense of there's some sort of fight going on. There's some sort of wrestle, and part of growing up our souls is being realistic about that. And in my tradition, the idea that Luther and Augustine talk about homo incurvatus in se, which is their definition of sin, and it is humans turned in on themselves. And this deep intuition I had that we are made for relationship, we are made for love, but something in me resists that. I don't want to need people. I don't want
Yeah.
people to need me. What I do, bit of me wants to be God, honestly.
Hmm.
Like that is psychologically very insightful and therefore quite liberating.
Yes.
um so yeah, I find it helpful, and it doesn't have the way I find it helpful is for self-reflection. I do not find it helpful as a concept where we finger point others, we judge others, we we beat other people around the head with it. There's a history in the church of it, hellfire and brimstone preachers terrifying the life out of people.
Mm.
I want no association with that whatsoever. But the log in my own eye, my own hypocrisy, my own complicity and injustice, my own entitlement, that I need help with, and the sin stuff seems to help me.
Yes. That's good. It's a great answer. I'm very interested in your church. I'm not sure. You still go to, what is it called exactly? Your denomination?
It's
Or
the Church of England.
the Church of England?
Yeah,
Is this the church where you have ecstatic experiences type of thing?
yeah,
Yes?
yeah. I mean, the funny thing about the Church of England is it's it's done some sort of like giant mergers and acquisitions, in that you it holds together radically different forms of worship within it.
See.
So you will have very kind of you churches that are indistinguishable from Roman Catholic, churches that are extremely liturgical, churches that are extremely theologically liberal, churches that are extremely conservative, evangelical, churches that are sort of essentially Pentecostal,
Hmm.
and lots that are just a sort of uneasy mixture.
Yes.
And mine's one of those, and that's
Uh-huh.
why I love it. Like, there's people who of all different styles, and I just bring my kind of ecstatic. I dance around at the back, and there's a few other people that's their thing. Uh, and then there's a lot of more, reserved British people who really don't want
Yes.
to do that.
And it's all happening in the same services.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely informal guitar worship.
Uh-huh.
Uh, yeah, it's not your sort of a standard Anglican liturgy. I have been in those churches as well and love them.
Hmm.
I don't feel tribally aligned. I think because I became a Christian a bit later, I'm
Hmm.
not a Roman Catholic because you can't just proclaim yourself to be one, and there's a whole thing that goes with that. But for every other, I would happily call myself some sort of mongrel of contemplative, Quaker, charismatic, evangelical, mystical. Just I want it all.
Yeah. It's good. How would you think about raising children in a church? Do you think for most people it's a good thing to do that, to bring your children to a church? I know there's a lot of for about a lot of people right now, there's a lot of different avenues that they're thinking about for wisdom traditions and religious
Mm,
traditions. And I think a lot of people now all of a sudden have this choice in front of them, whereas
yeah,
perhaps in different eras and ages that wasn't even a thing.
yeah.
Um, you still think it's wise to just go to church?
I mean, obviously I do because I am, but I we wrestled with it. My husband and I both became Christians a bit later, and
Hmm.
our friends who were raised in church, there's a bit of a mixed legacy there. Often, it feels like sometimes they've got quite a lot of things to unlearn,
Yeah.
and I would say it really depends on how healthy the church is that you're in. Um, but in general, and you know that your listeners will probably be familiar with the sort of McGilchrist hemisphere hypothesis. The if what I want to give my children is an ability to access a spiritual sensibility, right? I want their young formation to leave open the possibility of the love of God. I believe God exists and he loves them. I believe that Jesus died for them and I want them to know that. But I can't, that has to be their own thing, right? That has to be their own choice. That has to be their own walk. And so I want, my instinct is that by taking them to church, even if they later reject it, which we will obviously allow them to do with as much kindness and gentleness as we can,
Mm.
we have shaped their imaginative possibilities so that it doesn't sound like a completely mad concept.
Yes.
Whereas, you know, my atheist friends will sometimes say, isn't it coercive to take your children to church? Aren't you making them believe something that they wouldn't otherwise believe? But I think you can make the argument both ways.
Yeah.
By not inculcating a spiritual sensibility, by not making their formation some sort of ritual collective embodied spiritual practice, you are leaving them in a very left hemispheric world in which
Mm.
if they later, and I have friends who would say this now, they long to believe and they don't know how. And I think part of it is that they've had this very left hemispheric formation, which I think narrows what you can see and
Yeah.
narrows your ability to perceive the world as it really is. Um, so yeah, in some ways on a very budget level, it's like making your kid learn a musical instrument, even
Yes.
if it's never going to be their job.
Yeah.
They will appreciate going to see an orchestra play
Mm.
radically in a different way if they have picked up an instrument at some point in their life. They will hear music differently. They will be able to attend to the world differently because that formation will stay in them. It won't be a done deal. They don't have to become a Christian. They don't have to become a musician, but you are leaving them with options.
Mm. How do we train ourselves to be less left hemispheric? How do we get out of that? I mean, I think there's people that are so stuck in it that they can't see a way out of it.
Mm,
They can't even imagine it.
yeah. So I think if people are asking the question, they've already opened a little window.
Hmm.
I mean, I think going to church is a really good way. I'm obsessed with the communal and the collective.
Yeah.
The right hemisphere sees the wholes, right? It sees relationship between things, doesn't break things down into parts. So anything you can do to be in committed, collective, collaborative settings over time that do not adapt to your preferences. You can't be subtly optimizing to fit your particular desires, where you can be
Mm.
surrendering some of your control and choice and autonomy for the common good. That feels good to me.
Mm.
Feeding your imagination, not seeing, and this is why I think I totally hear this thing about listening to podcasts all day. If we see the world as some sort of information mine to be asset stripped,
Yeah.
that does not form us in healthy ways.
No.
If we see the world as a beautiful, fragile, bruised, and humans as beautiful and fragile and set of stories that we can attend to, sitting with things not for instrumental reasons, you know, listening to music, going for a walk with no inputs, paying attention to the beauty of the leaf. It's not rocket science, but we sort of let surrendering the idea that the world, all human beings are a machine, and letting us be what we are. It's complex, interconnected organisms.
Yeah.
Um, and repeatedly telling ourselves that story. Honestly, reformation takes time and repetition, and allowing ourselves to dwell in a different story before it can become real to us.
Mm. I think for you and for myself as well, it's important to talk to people that think differently and relate to the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this world getting less polarized? Is this something that we need to start small? Is this something that that you have hope for, or do you
Mm,
think it's gonna go into an even worse direction before it gets better?
I think the future is a mystery. And I wouldn't, it is also always surprising us, right?
Yeah.
Um, the honest answer is I don't know. I know that there is dark secret in the human heart, which is that we naturally prefer people like us, and we very much like it when people agree with us,
Mm,
and we are less likely to want to be in relationship with people who are unlike us and who disagree with us. Um, but there are seasons in human history where we have managed that tendency in us health in more healthy ways than we do now. I think there is a definite waking up to the dangers of the information environment we've built for ourselves. Um, but honestly, usually we go through these cycles and things end really badly, and then we go, oh, maybe we need each other. Maybe we need to build shared institutions. Maybe we need to set up a common life so we are in regular contact with each other. And that's always kind of fragile. So I don't know. I think the nonviolent practice that I find in the New Testament, but that you also see in Gandhi and um, Dr. King and the civil rights movement, is sort of spectacularly transformative and very simple and quite addictive once you
mm,
start practicing it. And if we can find a way to get that, which is sort of what my Roth chapter is about, we can find that way to get that into ordinary people's hands and somehow catalyze a social change where there's no longer any social permission for contempt, but there is high social permission for modeling nonviolent responses, then things could actually change quite fast because we are social creatures and we respond to trends and fashions,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And for a while, contempt was fashionable and it shouldn't be.
yeah. Another thing that I was thinking while I was reading your book was about the use of words, especially modern words that have changed their meaning, it seems, as opposed to their origins, where they come from. One of them that comes to mind is pride. Um,
Mm.
one that for a lot of people is empowering,
Mm-hmm.
is very positive.
Yeah.
How do you deal with this tension of these words that in origin mean something completely different, it seems, and now
Yeah.
they have such different connotations? Because I really struggle with it myself. I'm not sure how
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's why there's probably too much throat clearing in the start of my pride chapter because it's like, hey, what are all the things I don't think pride is?
Yeah.
And I do think there are forms of, you know, Michael Edward Dyson talks about black pride, and there are times in which reclaiming our own dignity and our own humanity and our own sense of value from people who would have sought to deny that from us is, I think, deeply moral and beautiful and part of being fully alive. And if pride is the word that's used for that, fine, great, no problem with it. The thing I'm trying to get at all the way through is, what are these temptations to disconnection? What are the things that pull us away from each other? And anything, I don't think celebrating our achievements with some humility is a problem. I don't think actually knowing what we're good at is a problem. It's when we claim full credit, right? It's when we forget that we are interdependent. It's when we forget all that we have received and we are not suitably grateful for the journey that we've been on. That again, it's that bit of us that does not want to need other people, does not want to admit any weakness or vulnerability, does not want to admit that we have received much, and does not want other people to need others. It's just sort of, in some ways, pride and sin are the same thing for me. They are disconnection. They are that pulling back into ourselves, away from relationship and into isolation. And anytime when we feel ourselves kind of that like distancing sense of self, which is usually because our sense of self is actually unstable, right? We are feeling undermined or anxious or envious, or and we're wanting to shore up our sense of self. That unhealthy individualizing tendency in us, I think, should be avoided at all costs because it isolates from us from each other, and that makes us miserable.
Hmm, that's well argued. I want to speak a little bit about, wait, what was it again? Yes, prayer is something
Mm,
that I've been doing for a long time, but I've not really updated how I do it much. And then someone told me that it's good to pray for humility. And when I started doing that, I found it to be so powerful.
mm,
And it's just kind of a practical advice to you, and to maybe other people listening. what are good things to pray for? Because
Wow.
sometimes I pray for outcomes. Sometimes when
Mm,
I'm sick, for example, I try to not pray to get better because I don't know if that's a good thing. But what are things that are good to pray for?
wow. What an interesting question. So I think we put a lot of focus on that bit of prayer, which is essentially asking for things.
Yeah.
But in my tradition, the understanding of prayer is much more capacious than that. And honestly, I find it helpful to put that bit at the end.
Hmm.
I think it's really clear in the New Testament that it's okay to ask for things that God wants to meet our needs. Um, but if you look at the Lord's Prayer, for example, which when someone asked Jesus, how should we pray? That's what he offered. It starts with worship, starts with getting your heart in the right posture and acknowledging that God is God.
Hmm.
Hallowed be your name is this weird old language. Holy is your name. The focus is not on us and what we need, it's outward. And it has all kinds of things in there. And one of them is give us this day our daily bread, meet our material needs. But the other one is forgive us. Praying for forgiveness is a really great thing to pray for. Confession is so lovely. Weirdly, it's so nice to be able to just be really honest
Yeah.
about all the ways we mess things up. And thanksgiving, giving thanks, noticing what we've already received. That's one of my most common prayers. God, help me receive the gifts I've already been given, because
Hmm.
the familiarity bias, the hedonic adaptation means there will be things I have prayed earnestly for 4 years, and then I get them, and 6 months later, I don't even notice I've got them.
Yeah.
We're on to the next thing. So yeah, worship, forgiveness, thanksgiving. And then, yeah, the things that we need, but also about the kind of people we want to become. I think a lot about the fruits of the spirit. Like, how do I become more loving? How do I become more patient? How do I become more kind? How to become more self-controlled, gentle? All these things. Asking for help with the areas we want to grow in, and humility is clearly one of those. So it's a good thing.
It's good. I will apply it. I think for some reason as a kid I never even considered praying differently or stopping to pray for the practical things. And then
Mm,
especially in pain, I find it really difficult to remain grateful.
mm,
And then it's ironic because I don't know if it's ironic, but a lot of people that are the most suffering seem to me to be the most wise or the most they carry themselves
mm.
with the most grace. And
Yeah.
I wonder how to do that. I wonder how you keep that faithfulness because the human mind tends to want to question things when
Mm,
it's going more in the bad direction. And I really doubt myself if everything wasn't going as well as it is right now, if my health wasn't perfect. Um,
mm,
what advice would you give to people in pain that are maybe starting to feel cynical about
mm.
life?
I mean, one thing I'd say to you is don't put your faith in your circumstances.
Yes, I
Like,
can tell myself that,
yeah, yeah,
and then I
yeah,
get there.
yeah. Yeah. But I think a lot of it is about the story we're telling ourselves, right? What we expect, what we feel we have a right to.
Yes,
And Western, prosperous, capitalist, highly educated societies have told us that it is possible and indeed right that we will live entirely free from discomfort, physical pain, intellectual annoyance, other people getting in our face,
yes,
friction on apps, right? The
yes,
the 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 smallness of the small the level of discomfort we're prepared to tolerate is so low. And the trouble is, that's a muscle. You lose it. If you
yes,
ever
that's
just
true.
experience discomfort, you can. It's not Oliver Berkman's great at this in his book 4,000 Weeks. He's like, we
Yes,
were we were told that all of these time-saving devices would save loads of time and make us feel really relaxed and never in a rush. Like, no, that did not happen. Um, but for people in pain, I almost feel like that's holy ground that I don't want to tread on, because it's such an individual thing, and people giving bad advice and being patronizing from the outside when you are suffering and struggling is
yeah,
deeply unhelpful.
yeah. It's such a
My
personal thing.
yeah, my experience has been in the times that have been very black, I have had to put my roots down deep into love. And I have known my need, and it has driven me to the places that I actually think sustain us all the time. So pain and suffering can be very clarifying. They can strip away the nonsense and the distractions and make us go, right, how do I want to live? Who do I want to be becoming? And in that sense, they can be a gift. But yeah, honestly, in my experience, like without the comfort of the love of God, I'm very grumpy when
Mm.
things aren't easy.
Would you say it's a good thing as well to voluntarily be less comfortable? So we're speaking about this discomfort being something that we're always trying to avoid. Um,
Mm.
is that a good thing, you think, to help with that?
I'm definitely not a kind of hair shirt, self-flagellating medieval monk. Um,
But let's say in more healthy manners, like not in manners that are
yeah.
damaging to us, but doing things that seem to be positive that are not necessarily comfortable.
So I'm not sure we need to seek things out, but I do think we might need to surrender to them.
Mm.
Um, there's all this stuff with hormesis, which is the sort of underlying physiological mechanism that's at work in all the stuff about cold water swimming, for example. You can kind of shock your body by putting it, running a long marathon, by putting it through pain and discomfort, and the sort of repair mechanisms overfunction. And so that's what strengthens your muscles. That's what builds your immune system when you're doing cold water swimming. And that's, not my bag, but fine. I believe in the mechanism. I think so. One of the ways I think about living in community is a sort of akin to that. That it's quite uncomfortable emotionally at times, and sometimes physically. Um, but it is discomfort, irritation for a purpose, not just randomly. I'm not sure, like randomly exposing yourself. Maybe, honestly, that's a really interesting question because I don't know the answer.
Thank you.
Maybe.
Thank you. I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to repeat that I think this book is extremely important. What you're doing is extremely important. I would encourage everyone listening to give it a read. Your introduction was amazing, by the way. I think if people just start there, they'll probably keep reading. So thank you so much for your time today.
Lucas, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real joy.
I appreciate you. Likewise.